Traditionally, religion attributes extraordinary qualities to God. He's omnipotent, he's omniscient, he's perfectly good, perfectly just, eternal, necessary, and the creator of everything that exists. Over the centuries, theologians have added layer upon layer of superlatives until God has become, by definition, the greatest conceivable being. Yet there is one perfection that is rarely, if ever, mentioned alongside these others. Nobody seems to call God a perfect communicator. Sit with how strange that is. Here's a being who, we are told, wants to be known. He made us for relationship. He grieves when we turn away. His whole project is to reach us. Communication is not a side feature of this project, it is the project. And communication is something we are good at judging, because we do it all day. We know what being understood looks like. We know what being misunderstood looks like. So, of all the perfections you might pin on a being whose central aim is to reach every human, perfect communication ought to sit at the very top of the list. But it never does. And I don't think that's an oversight, because you just need to say it out loud. God is a perfect communicator. That claim hits reality so hard that even a devout believer feels the dissonance. So the attribute always gets quietly left off the list. And nobody mentions that gap between what a perfect communication would look like and what we actually see in the world. Let me be concrete. If a being with infinite knowledge and infinite power actually wanted to communicate with human beings, what would we expect? What would that look like? Unlike every human communicator, an omniscient being knows every limitation of every listener. He knows every language, every culture, every misunderstanding before it arises, every ambiguity before it's perceived, every historical circumstance that might obscure his message. And unlike every human communicator, he also possesses unlimited power to overcome these obstacles. A human teacher may fail because she lacks time, knowledge, resources. A perfect communicator lacks none of these. This observation allows us to derive a straightforward expectation. Communication is successful when the meaning intended by the sender is accurately understood by the intended audience. If the sender possesses unlimited knowledge and unlimited ability to adapt the message to every recipient, then predictable failures of communication should disappear. Perfect communication, therefore, is not merely the production of a flawless message, it is the successful transmission of that message to those for whom it is intended. Several consequences follow naturally. First, we'd expect clarity. The intended meaning should be sufficiently clear that sincere and competent listeners and readers do not consistently arrive at mutually incompatible conclusions about its central content. This doesn't require every sentence to admit only to one possible interpretation, but it does require that the message reliably communicates what its author intended. Second, we'd expect universality, at least if God genuinely desires all human beings to know him. Access to divine revelation should not depend primarily upon the accident of birthplace, native language, historical period, or cultural inheritance. A God who desires relationship with all humanity should not communicate in a manner that systematically advantages one population over another. Third, we'd expect preservation. A perfect communicator would not merely send an important message, he would ensure that the intended meaning remained reliably available to future generations. Essential truths would not become dependent upon disputed manuscripts, uncertain textual traditions, or centuries of scholarly reconstruction. Fourth, we would expect accessibility. The central message should be understandable by ordinary people as well as specialists. Expertise may deepen one's appreciation, but it should not determine whether one can correctly understand the message in the first place. The most important communication imaginable should not require fluency in ancient languages or years of professional training simply to discover what it says. Finally, we would expect directness. This expectation is perhaps the most striking. Human beings rely upon intermediaries because they must. We write books because we cannot speak personally to everyone. We appoint teachers because our reach is limited. We translate because languages divide us. An omnipotent being faces none of these constraints. If such a being wished to communicate with every individual, nothing prevents him from doing so directly, and in a manner perfectly adapted to each person's capacities. He does not suffer from limited time, limited attention, or limited availability. He doesn't run out of opportunities to clarify misunderstandings. He does not get tired. These expectations are not extraordinary demands placed upon God. They are simply what the concept of perfect communication appears to entail when combined with omniscience, omnipotence, and a genuine intention to make oneself known. So look at the world we actually have. There are thousands of distinct Christian denominations. That is inside one religion, all reading much the same book, all sincere, all praying for guidance, all arriving at different answers about what it says. Now set Christianity beside Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and the thousands of traditions that have risen and fallen across history. Each one convinced, each one incompatible with the others. This is not what perfect transmission looks like. The Quran is held to be God's perfect and final word, and it still generates whole libraries of tafsir, interpretation, to settle what it means. Its early variant versions were reportedly burned to enforce a single official text. A self-preserving divine message should not need an editor with a torch. Then there is the language problem, which I find quietly damning. Many Muslims hold that the Quran can only be truly grasped in Arabic. Translation loses something essential. Plenty of Christians say the same about the original Hebrew and Greek. Set aside whether it's true and notice what it gives away. It says the creator of the universe, who can do anything, could not craft a message that survives translation. An omnipotent author should be able to land his meaning with full force and full beauty in any language. Lost in translation is a human limitation. Here it is being pinned on a being who is supposed to have no limitation. The same goes for every sacred text locked in an ancient tongue that now needs a guild of specialists to decode. So here's the situation. A message meant to be clear has produced thousands of sincere, contradictory readings. A message meant to be universal reached some people and not others, in some languages and not others. A message meant to be preserved reaches us through disputed, edited, translated copies with no originals. That is not what perfect communication looks like. It is exactly what human communication looks like. Texts written by people, copied by people, argued over by people, carried down through the ordinary fog of history. Thoughtful believers do offer answers to these objections. We're going to look at 3 serious replies. Reply 1. Clarity would destroy free will. This is the big one. If God made himself and his message unmistakably clear, we would have no choice but to believe and obey. We would be compelled, like a calculator forced to show the right answer. So, God stays partly hidden, leaves the message partly open precisely to keep the free space in which we can choose him. Coerced love is not love, forced belief is not faith. The ambiguity is a gift. Reply 2. The fault is ours, not his. God did communicate perfectly. We are the problem. We are sinful, distracted, hard-hearted, motivated to misread. A perfect signal can still be received badly by a broken receiver. The static is on our end. Reply 3. God's ways are beyond us. Maybe what looks like failed communication is working at a level we cannot perceive. We are judging an infinite mind by the standards of a finite one. Who are we to call the message imperfect just because it doesn't look perfect to creatures like us? 3 sincere replies. Let's respond to each one at a time. First, the free will reply. The free will defense rests on a buried assumption that being convinced is the same as being compelled. It is not. There is a difference between being convinced that something is true and choosing what to do about it. The first is not a choice at all. You cannot choose to believe the moon is made of cheese. However hard you try, belief follows the evidence whether you like it or not. The second is where freedom lives. Once you are convinced, you still choose how to respond. Picture a clinical trial. The doctor explains the procedure, the risks, the data. She answers every question you have. Does giving you more information rob you of free choice? Of course not. It does the opposite. It makes informed consent possible. A decision made in ignorance is not freer than one made in knowledge. It's just worse informed. A doctor who withholds information to protect your freedom to choose would not be respecting your autonomy. She would be committing malpractice. The same holds everywhere. A map does not get more useful when half the roads are rubbed out. A contract does not get fairer when the small print is hidden. Clarity is what makes real choice possible. So, when believers say God hides the truth to keep our choice free, they have it backwards. Clarity does not abolish freedom. It enables the only kind worth having, the informed kind. A teacher who explains the lesson clearly has not trampled her students' free will. She has done her job. The teacher who mumbles contradictions and then blames the class for not following has simply failed. The free will defense does not explain why the message is unclear. It runs on the idea that ignorance makes us free and knowledge enslaves us. The truth is the other way around. If God wanted free, informed consent to the most important decision a person can make, clarity would not be the obstacle. Clarity would be the solution. Second, we have the "it's our fault" reply. This one has surface appeal. Yes, receivers can be faulty. But run it back through the teacher analogy, and it breaks on first contact. Picture a class. The lesson ends. A few students say they caught part of it. The rest are lost, and the ones who think they understood cannot agree with each other on what was taught. Some are not even sure what the subject was. And some are not sure there was a teacher in the room at all. What do we conclude? We do not say the students failed. We say the teacher failed to teach clearly. Now make that teacher omnipotent. Give her infinite knowledge and perfect insight into every student's mind, how each one learns, what each one already knows, exactly where each one will get confused and why. She's every gifted teacher and every support assistant rolled into one limitless being. What excuse could that teacher have for a room full of contradictory notes? None. She would reach every student every time. The whole point of being a perfect communicator is that the state of the receiver is not an obstacle. You account for it perfectly because you understand it perfectly, and you have unlimited power to meet it. So the message was perfect, the humans just failed to get it, is not a defense, it's a confession. It admits the message was not perfectly communicated, because perfect communication is exactly the thing that succeeds no matter who's receiving. You cannot blame the audience when the communicator had total knowledge of and total power over how the audience would receive it. The humans are sinful does not rescue the perfect communicator. It just renames his failure and hands us the bill. The third reply, that the message might be perfect in some way we cannot perceive, is the mystery card. But if perfect communication can look identical to total failure and still count as perfect, then perfect has stopped meaning anything. You've defined the attribute so that no possible evidence could ever count against it. That's not a claim about the world anymore, it's a force field around your belief. And the same force field is available to everyone. The Muslim can say the Quran's perfection is beyond your grasp. The Hindu can say it of the Vedas. It is perfect in ways you cannot understand, defends every text equally, which means it singles out none of them, which means it does no work at all. And there's a deeper problem underneath it all. If God's communication is beyond human understanding, then why communicate? The whole premise was a being who wants to be understood by humans. An act of communication that only succeeds at a level humans cannot reach is not communication to humans. It's something else. A soliloquy, maybe, not a message. So in my eyes, all three replies fail, and we're left looking at this gap. A being defined by perfection, whose central purpose is to be known, has left a record indistinguishable from no perfect communicator having spoken at all. I want to be careful here. I'm not saying this proves no God exists. The claim is narrower, and I think harder to wriggle out of. The world looks exactly like what we would expect if no perfect communicator stood behind these texts, and nothing like what we would expect if the greatest possible being had really tried to reach us. The thousands of contradictory traditions, the disputed manuscripts, the meaning lost in translation, the endless congresses convened to work out what God really meant. All of it is the fingerprint of human authorship, not divine perfection. We expect a great teacher to leave a room that agrees on what was taught. We do not lower that bar for a merely human one. So why would we lower it for a being we have defined as perfect? If what we actually see is what counts as perfect communication, the word has been emptied out, and we should stop using it. The ordinary processes of human communication predict precisely the kinds of ambiguity, disagreement, textual development, translation difficulties, and interpretive diversity that characterize the history of religion.